الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا بالقاسم محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والفجر وليال عشر صدق الله العلي العظيم. Our series of lectures have gone into its third night. As we sit here today, each one of us gathered here for the tragedy of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Know that throughout the world people are suffering. As our brothers rightly said, as time moves on, as the dhuhr of the Imam is delayed, you find that this nation suffers and suffers. We find in a tradition that the coming of the Imam is beneficial to us, one of those reasons being that we are removing pain and suffering from society at large. You look today and you see the not coming of the Imam is like a cancer which is spreading in the body of society. The longer you leave it, the more this cancer begins to spread. In the 21st century, we have seen things take place that's never taken place before. The signs are moving very fast, and if you look at some of the experts in Mahdiism, they'll tell you that approximately 95% of all of the signs before the coming of the Imam is in front of us. Today, you may think that it's far away, but slowly but surely, you've seen times change and you've seen situations change. One of the biggest catalysts in the last 15 years have been 9/11. And from 9/11 onwards, you've seen signs moving very fast. A couple of years ago, who would have thought that we would be here today? Who would have thought that sheer genocide would have started in the way that it started? And slowly you're seeing that situations can change overnight. In a blink of an eye, what was a country, you find it's a war zone today. I remember a number of years ago, I was sitting with an ambassador, Syrian ambassador at the time. And at the time, Syria was a secular country. At the time, this ambassador was a Sunni. And as I sat with him, he looked towards me and he said, "Our country is miles ahead of what you Muslims can develop." I said, "Why? What's the problem?" He says that we live in a secular country like Syria, and you see that there are no religious tensions within our country. The Alawis and the Druze and the Sunnis and the Shias, all of them live side by side. We have no problem whatsoever. 6 months later when I met him again, he said, "God knows what's happened. Our country is broken out into war." See, within a second, everything changes. That country whose Sunnis and Shias live side by side, you look today and you see killings going on. I want to take you back to some of the traditions of Sheikh Mufid. Go and see what he says. 1100 years ago, he's predicting. He's saying that Amir al-Mu'mineen is predicting that Akhir al-Zaman, you will see bloodshed and you'll see civil war rising in the Maghrib. Maghrib today is what? Morocco, Libya, Algeria, Egypt, Tunisia. Within history of Islam, if you go from the first date to today, you don't see civil war in any of these countries bar the Arab Springs that took place. And now Amir al-Mu'mineen is panning the way. He's saying civil strife will start in these countries, and the effect will be such that Yemen, there will be civil war within Yemen. You look around and you see Iraq won't be saved. You look at Syria, won't be saved. All over the Middle East, it's as if there'll be fire in the Middle East. And eventually, all of this tragedy, all of this pain and suffering will go all the way to Syria. And he says when Syria erupts within civil war, in the tradition now it says that, and Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying this, and look at the way that he's precise. Imam here says, he says that I can see that in the city of Latakia is that city in the Mediterranean where today Christians occupy Latakia. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, he says, I can see thunderbolts coming from the west, and he says, I can see gases coming from the ground. Convert that today. He says, I can see almost missiles coming from the west and chemical weapons coming from the ground. That's today. Now look today what happens after that. He says, then when Syria falls further into strife, at that moment a man will rise and he will come from the family of Abu Sufyan and he'll be known as the Sufyani. When this Sufyani rises, according to the tradition, says one thing. It says, wherever you go, if you go into the ground, you'll find Sufyan will come find you and take you out of the ground. And at that moment, he'll shed your blood. The life, the property, the respect, nothing of the Shia will be preserved. This is Akhir zaman. And this is the way things are turning. This is the way things are moving. In the world, there will not be a respite for Shias. Let me ask you a question. When you go to Pakistan today, and when you see 97 doctors in Karachi being killed just because of the fact that they're Shia, what does that tell you? If in London 97 doctors were to be killed, it would be an entire brain drain on the country. If in Toronto 97 doctors from one ethnicity were to be killed, it would be an entire brain drain. Where would you go then? 97 doctors within Karachi being killed. Go and see, look at, for example, Afghanistan. They say the Taliban within one night killed 4,000 people in Mazar-e-Sharif, in Kabul, in different areas, in Ghazni. 4,000 people were killed. If you look at the tradition, if you go back to even the CNN and the BBC reporting, you'll find that they were ripping the mothers' bellies open, taking out their fetus and burning it on the roads. They didn't leave anyone. Today, if we're Shia and we're sitting here, don't you know, why don't you open your eyes and see what's happening in the world? Why don't you awaken your consciousness? You know, the problem with us is we wake up in the morning, we go to our work, our mundane lives, we come back, we eat, and we go to sleep, not realizing the Prophet of God has said, that person who wakes up in the morning and does not think about the umur of the Muslimin, falaysa Muslim, they are not a Muslim. And today, what are we doing? What are we doing? Do we actually care what's happening in the world? Do you actually feel the pain of other people? You know, all of those nations who feel and think that that problem is not going to come onto them, believe me, in your lifetime you will see these problems. If you do not help those people who are suffering, if you do not stand up against oppression, and when I talk about oppression, I mean global oppression. Oppression has no religion and color. If a person is oppressed, it requires the sons of Sayyid al-Shuhada to stand up and say, that's wrong. Today, let me ask you a question. Are we doing this, or are we allowing people to suffer? Go back to Bahrain and see. Look at what's happening in Bahrain. Look at the killing which was taking place. Look at the bloodshed, which nobody talks about it today. Your brothers are being killed. Know one thing, that if you do not stand up and make that difference, tomorrow when the problem comes to you, there'll be no one to help you. History repeats itself. History is such that if you do not stand up against the oppressor, you find it comes to you. How many communities have seen it? Bahrain has seen it. Who thought that Bahrain would be here? Who thought Syria would be here? Who thought Egypt would be in the situation it is? Who thought Libya would be in the situation it is? Who thought Yemen would be there? Karachi, Afghanistan, Iraq. I could continue onwards and see all over the Middle East fire is burning. All over the West even, you're finding misconceptions which are taking place. Put everything into context. It is now the time that you need to act, because if you do not act, what happens is that the dhuhr of the Imam is delayed and problems come onto our shoulders. We're not those people who say Armageddon needs to take place. The biggest misconception in the media today is the fact that they believe, that the Shias believe, that the world needs to be destroyed for the Mahdi to come. The world doesn't need to be destroyed. Tomorrow is Thursday. Tomorrow night you'll be reciting Du'a Kumail. What is the secret of Du'a Kumail? The secret of Du'a Kumail is the dhuhr of the 12th Imam alayhi salam. The secret is the dhuhr of the Imam. What are we saying? We are saying to our people that if you understand the secret of Du'a Kumail, even you can call back the 12th Imam when that Friday morning comes, when that Fajr comes. It isn't the fact that we're waiting for Armageddon to come, for people to die, for Sufyani to come. Allah can change His will, and Allah will change His will when the people are ready. So tomorrow when you come into the mosque, don't sit in the mosque thinking that we're just reading this ceremonially. Look deeper inside and see, when Amir al-Mu'mineen is dictating this dua to Kumail, he's dictating it with a secret. Ahlul Bayt don't openly give their secrets out to people like that. They have to be ashab as-sir. They have to understand what this sir, this secret is. For that secret, you need to ponder. You need to open your eyes and understand that secret. Inshallah, if we have time, maybe we can dedicate 45 minutes to the secrets of Du'a Kumail. It'll blow your mind away the way that Amir al-Mu'mineen talks about this dua, the way that he's conversing with his Lord. One of the ways that the Ahlul Bayt did tabligh was this way, was the way of dua. And you see Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam, in the very same way do this. So slowly times are changing. What's going to happen tomorrow, you don't know. You think we're saved here as well? I want you to go back to Belgium. I remember last year in Belgium, the first person to give their life for the sake of the Ahlul Bayt in the Western world was an imam in Belgium. In Brussels, he was murdered and his mosque was burnt down. By who? Wahhabi fundamentalist. See, when the Western world talks about Islam, the mind goes towards fundamentalism. I tell them that we are the most oppressed nation because they've been oppressing us for 1400 years. We've been oppressed. Today, when we stand up, we show a different face to Islam. What is that face? That face is the face of Sayyid al-Shuhada, the face of moderation, the face of balance, the face of humanity. That is what Islam is about, to help thy neighbor, to help other people, to become selfless. This is Islam. And what do you see Islam today? The face of fundamentalism. Is that Islam? Fundamentalism is a phenomenon within Islam that's never been within Islam like this. It's only in the last 20 years or so you see this face of fundamentalism. Otherwise, Islam was a religion of moderation. Had it not been a religion of moderation, the Western world wouldn't be here where it is today. If the Western world has advanced, it is because of Islam that the Western world has advanced. Otherwise, the West wouldn't be here. Why do I say this, right? Go look at the study of Islam. Look at the study of the West. Go back 1400 years ago and see. When Islam came, Europe was in the Dark Ages. Canada and America were nothing 1400 years ago. You had no inhabitants there. 1400 years ago, Europe was going through the Dark Ages. The king in those days in the United Kingdom, for example, in Great Britain, or in England as it was in the time, had a shower once every 2 years, right? So that's how behind they were. Europe was in the Dark Ages. There was nothing there of civilization. What came and revived Europe? The revival of Europe was based upon the revival of Islam within the Middle East. And when Islam comes, the Prophet of God institutionalizes within 23 years intellectual development. Why do I say this? It begins a system. You see, when the Prophet of God came, there were two powers which were the greatest powers in those days. One was the East European Empire, and on the other hand, you found was the Sasanian Persian Empire. They had a satellite state, and that satellite state was within Yemen, and another satellite state was in Ethiopia. Two superpowers were fighting it out. The lowest level you find of civilization was within Arabia. At the lowest level, you found that the Prophet of God was raised from that nation. Why is that? It's ironic. The lowest nation that nobody looked towards, a prophet was raised from that nation. If you go to the khutbah Fadakiyah, you'll see when Zahra talks in that khutbah, when people have done commentaries on this, what do you find? What does she say? Says that you had no respect. My father gave you respect. What did you have? No concept of najasat and taharat. You were drinking from the urine of camels and people like that, animals like that. What happened? The Prophet of God came and taught them taharat, right? Your swords were clashing. You were fighting. My father came and removed the differences. What did my father essentially do? What does Zahra say? If you sum it all up, my father taught you how to be human beings. That's what made the difference. And you see progression take place in the Islamic world. After 100 years almost after the death of the Prophet, you see a revival of intellectual sciences. You see when Christianity came into Europe and when it became the main religion of Europe, all intellectual endeavors ceased to exist. 900 years of the Plato Academy came crashing down. Why? Because Europe had become rigid. You see, when Christianity then came within Europe, Justinian, when he institutionalized Christianity, you found that the first thing he did the same thing as the second Khalifa did. He says the Kitab of Allah is sufficient for us. All of intellectual thought became redundant. This Plato Academy, 900 years of intellectual thought, finished. And they say within tradition they ran. From Alexandria and Athens, they ran to two places. One, they took refuge within Syria, and the other one, they took refuge within Iran. So for most of you guys, if you've seen Star Wars, right, you find the Jedis, when they go away, for a long period of time, they go into hiding. In the same way, these intellectuals went into hiding, waiting for that day to come when someone comes and revives it. Two nations revived it. One was the Banu Umayyah. Despite the fact that however evil they were, they did do some good when it came to intellectual revival. And one of them was that they revived intellectualism within Syria. They went to Christians who were there, who were part of this Plato Academy, and they asked them, why don't you come and help us establish a system? Do you think the Umayyads spread Islam willy-nilly? The spread of Islam then was because of this bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy goes back to those Christians and goes back to those Greeks who expounded that philosophy. And in the same way, when you find that the shift then comes, when the Abbasis come into power, they move from Damascus and they take their entire empire towards Persia. The purpose of that, because they also knew that the Syrians were supporting the Umayyads, but they also knew that there was another school within Plato's academy, and this was a very intellectual school, which is found within Iran. And this is where you see the rise of the Barmaki family. If we look towards the Abbasid history, you find that the Barmaki family rose from Persia. And who are these people? They were from a line dating back to the time of Socrates. And here then you find that this wisdom which was going, this transcendental wisdom, the wisdom never came. That wisdom of Idris, right, was being passed down, and that wisdom came to Persia. And then the Abbasids went and they took all of these Persians and they said, revive us. The golden era of Islam therefore comes there. In the time of Ma'mun Rashid, what do you see? You see Baytul Hikmah, right? The house of wisdom which is established. And in this house, you see a revival of intellectual sciences. They say when the second Khalifa sent his army to Egypt, and when this army comes into Egypt, they go to Alexandria. In Alexandria, a message goes to the second Khalifa. And that message is this, that there is a massive library there which dates back thousands of years. Should we burn it or should we leave it? He turns around and he says, the Kitab of Allah is sufficient, burn it. At that moment, Amir al-Mu'mineen was standing there. And he goes towards the second Khalifa and he says, listen, you don't understand these books, but there will be a nation that will come, will understand this. Leave these books. The second Khalifa says, fine, leave it. Not only, and you see this, right? Not only did he leave all of the books, but he left all of the mystical manuals. And then after that, 100 years later, you find in the time of Ma'mun Rashid, all of these books then later were translated. 3 communities worked together. The Muslim community, the Jewish community, and the Christian community worked together to translate all of this work. And later on, it was translated back into the indigenous languages of Europe. In fact, it was through 2 ports that Greek philosophy then came back. One through Spain and the other through Venice. Today you see relics of Islam within Venice, and all of the south you see relics within Spain. That's what made the difference. So if Islam, or if the Western world is where it was because of this movement. If you go into the 16th century and the 17th century, and you see the rise of rationalism and the rise of philosophy, on the backs of what? On the backs of Islamic philosophers like Ibn Rushd, who spent an entire lifetime commentating upon Aristotle and giving his own ideas. You see the entire scientific revolution that later on took place within Europe. If we have algorithm today, right? If we have computers today, if we have laptops today, the foundations and the formulas go all the way back essentially to the Islamic world. And in fact, they go back to that university which was teaching 200 topics that today within the Western world, we only maybe have 120 topics, 200 topics were being taught, and that university in Medina was known as the University of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Be proud of your heritage. If the Western world is where it is because of Islam. And they built on this. You see, a clever person does what? When the foundations are laid, they built upon that. So they were intellectual as well, the fact that they built it. Today in the Western world, if we are seeing problems, I say to people, go back to the way Islam was. You found 3 religions living harmoniously together. The Middle East today may be a Middle East of war and crisis, but if you go back 1100 years ago, in the Middle East, they were living peacefully. And this is the prototype that we need to establish here as well. You found Jewish theology evolving. If the likes of Moses bin Maimonides were coming and developing Jewish philosophy, what were they doing, right? If you look at Moses bin Maimonides, 90% of all of his works is a carbon copy of Ibn Sina. Even the mistakes that Ibn Sina makes, Moses bin Maimonides makes the same mistakes. And if you go today to Thomas Aquinas, right? If you look at the revival of Catholic theology, Who was he? It was almost as if he was a student of Ibn Sina and this peripatetic movement that was taking place within the Islamic world. We have given a huge amount to both of these Abrahamic religions, but we don't know today. The rise of mysticism, right? Go back 900 years ago. Go to the Maghrib and you see the philosophies and the mysticism, the irfan which is found within the Catholic school. Whether it's Teresa of Avila, whether it's John of the Cross within Spain, whether it's Meister Eckhart. If you look at most of their visions, and if you look at most of their mystical writings, it goes back to the Sufi movements which were taking place in the Maghrib. And in fact, it goes back to Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. That's where it goes back to. So look, we've given a lot when it's come to Islam, and when it's come to the revival of sciences. We've given a lot, intellectual thought. But why was this intellectual thought allowed to happen? Today, when we look at the bloodthirsty people like Ma'mun and Harun Rashid, but you know there was a good quality in them as well. And they allowed intellectual thought to take place. That's what's the difference. Yes, they were oppressive when it came to the Shia, but they allowed one thing, and that was intellectual development. They may have killed the Imams, but they made the Imams work in such a way that the Imams gave that knowledge, and the Imams helped this religion survive. You see, when Greek philosophy was running wild in the time of the Abbasids, Islam would have perished as well because there was inhiraf coming. What the Imam then does is he revives the right ways and thinkings of Islam. The Imam are the guardians of Islam. And so this is why you see that from 12 Imams, you find the first Imam establishes justice. His jihad is a jihad of patience and silence. The second Imam's jihad is what? Diplomacy in the way that he deals with Muawiyah. The third Imam's jihad is that he sacrifices his life. But you find from the fourth Imam is the revival and the preservation of the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. From the fifth Imam to the ninth Imam, you find an intellectual jihad. That is what true jihad is here in this context. The jihad of the intellect, the revival of the intellectual sciences. From the fifth Imam to the ninth Imam, you have an intellectual jihad. Essentially, when the Western world thinks of a jihad, it thinks of fighting. No, when we teach our children what jihad is what? Jihad is a struggle, and the struggle starts within yourself. The minor jihad is fighting. You see, that's not our jihad. Our jihad is the intellectual jihad. Our jihad is the jihad of selflessness. Our jihad is helping that old woman cross the road. And our jihad is to help that person who has wronged us. Our jihad is what? When a person slaps us in the face, to swallow that pride and to swallow that arrogance, that tomorrow when that person comes to ask for help, you help them. So really, what is the concept of jihad in the mind of a Shia Muslim? In the Shia Muslim is to revive the humanity and to help all forms of society. That is jihad. When we talk about, and when people, in fact, we don't talk about this, when people talk about jihad of the sword and of the knife and of the gun, that's not jihad. Know that our fuqaha have said, you are not even allowed to fight an offensive jihad. That's what our fuqaha say. You can't attack someone. You can only defend yourself. And as you know, within our human rights, human beings have the ability to defend themselves within proportion. You've been given that ability by Islam. The West gives you that ability as well to defend yourself. But we as Muslims, we are not allowed to fight an offensive war. This is why you find that we are different from them. Their religion is different. When I talk about them, I talk about our brothers, right? Their religion is different. Our religion is different. Our religion is based upon compassion. Our religion is based upon Sayyid al-Shuhada. When Sayyid al-Shuhada comes to Karbala, he doesn't start fighting first. He says to Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, he says, go and ask them, let's have dialogue. Let's solve these problems. What do they want? Do you want me to exile? Do you want me to be exiled? In a tradition it says, he says, I'll go to Hind, I'll go to India, but I don't want war. I don't want to fight. I haven't come here to fight. I've come here to guide people. I'm an imam. You know what an imam is? A guide towards people. He's here to help people. He's here to take him towards the perfection. That is what Islam is about. So today the problem is this, that in the 21st century, we haven't marketed Islam properly. It's not the fault of the Western world when they look upon us. It's the fact that we haven't done our job properly. You see, people are good people wherever they are, whether you're in Canada or America or in the UK or France, wherever you are in the world, people are good people. It's the fact that we haven't marketed ourselves. That's why people have a misconception. Despite the fact that we live in a global village. Global village means this. Whatever I'm saying here is being relayed in Australia. People know what we're saying, right? Everyone is listening to what we're saying all over the world and across the world. That's a global village. But the fact is, despite this global village, we haven't been able to market Islam. Is it the fault of the world or is it our fault? The message of Sayyid al-Shuhada is this: spread my message. What does Sayyidah Zainab do? You take a lesson, right? Imam Hussein is killed. What does Sayyidah Zainab do? She goes from Kufa to Sham, spreading the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Her tears were used to spread. When she was crying, people would come and ask, "Why are you crying for?" She says, "Don't you know? My brother was slaughtered thirsty." "Really? Who's your brother?" Says, "My brother is the grandson of the Prophet." She did tabligh. She used the latest technology of the time to do tabligh. Otherwise, the biggest superpower was that of Yazid. 30,000 men he takes to one location in a desert. 72 men. No media would have covered it. You know how media quash it today? When something is happening in the world, sometimes when the media don't like it, they quash it. Very easily, Yazid could have destroyed the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. But Sayyidah Zainab came as the mouthpiece and she spread the message. What is she teaching us? She's teaching us this: learn to spread the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Because when you spread it, it's humanity. Humanity comes to us, it appeals to them. You find that the Imam is teaching this selflessness. The Imam is teaching family values. The Imam is teaching forgiveness. When Imam is standing there alone, right? When the Imam is alone, all of his family have been massacred. You know what he says to Allah? Look at the dialogue. Look at the way that he's talking to Allah. He says, "Allah, they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them, Allah. If they turn back, forgive them." See the parallels between the Imam and Jesus. What does Jesus say? The same thing. He says, "God, they don't know what they're doing. Forgive them. Forgive them." Forgiveness, it's a massive thing. Otherwise today, leaders such as Gandhi wouldn't have taken Sayyid al-Shuhada as their role models. So Sayyid al-Shuhada is a role model for all of the world. We need to market that though. When in this time, day and age, when you find that situation is tough, and the situation will get worse as well. You see, it's easy as this. Today, you see that there's a war breaking out within Syria, right? I've seen this myself in London. War is breaking out. The BBC reported this. They said that there are people, reverts, from places like Luton, who are going to Syria to fight against Bashar al-Assad. And fine, we're not political. Alawis for us are not Shia, right? Regardless of what anybody says. Alawis are not Shia. Alawis in terms of their theology are more Christian. They believe in the carnation. They believe that Jesus' manifestation is in the form of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Therefore, Amir al-Mu'mineen essentially is God. That's not our belief. And when it comes to praise, if they ever have to pray, they close their hands. If you can look at Bashar al-Assad praying, he closes his hands. So on the one hand, if they have to pray, they pray the Sunni way. And if they have to believe something, they're more Christian. They have nothing to do with us. So what's happening? We have no interest essentially within Syria other than one thing. And that is the preservation of the shrine of Sayyidah Zainab. And the preservation, again, of life. That's it. What is our purpose? Not just in Syria, but across the world. That wherever there is oppression, Imam Hussein has taught us, regardless of skin, color, race, if a Jewish man is being oppressed, we will stand up and support him. Why will we do that? Because Imam Hussein has taught us that wherever there is an oppressed person, you stand up. That is your humanity within you. You don't differentiate then and say, just because a Muslim is attacking a non-Muslim, we will support that Muslim. Sayyid al-Shuhada is teaching us that whenever a man is oppressed, whoever they may be, you stand up and you help that person because our humanity dictates that. And that is timeless. This is what our ulama have taught us. This is what our maraj have taught us. I want to take you to a story, right? And this person is inspirational. I want to take you to a story. Imam Musa as-Sadr. Where was he from? Lebanon. You know what he did? That Shia nation that were cleaning toilets. If there's any Lebanese here, you'll know this. If you go back to the 50s, right? Where were the Shia in the 50s? Go to Lebanon and see. They were cleaning toilets of people. They were divided. If you looked at them, they were fighting amongst each other. It took one son of Zahra to stand up. And it's amazing the way Allah does this. Have you noticed within the history of Tashayyu, whenever there's been a problem, one alim, one mujtahid, one faqih from the line of Zahra stands up and says, if my grandfather's religion is at stake, we'll come forward and we'll help this religion. Imam Musa Sadr was this man. He comes forward and in 10 years he changes the entire destiny of the Shia within Lebanon so that they become a power within Lebanon. One day Musa Sadr goes to a shop and he goes and he sits down at that shop, and it was an ice cream shop. So the person who narrates this, he says, look, Imam Musa Sadr didn't even like ice cream. He says he wasn't one of the, he was a traditional alim. They say it's makruh for an alim to go outside and eat on the road, right? So he says that he didn't even like ice cream. He goes and he orders a vanilla ice cream and a chocolate and he orders for everyone. And people are thinking, why is Imam Musa Sadr ordering ice cream? And he's sitting there. They order all the ice creams. And when people look, Imam Musa Sadr is there. One by one, people come and they start buying from that shop. And within half an hour, the entire shop is packed. So one of the guys, his secretary, says to him, Imam, what are you doing? You don't even like ice cream, firstly. Secondly, you're sitting outside. Thirdly, you haven't even eaten. You've ordered all of us ice cream, but you're not eating yourself. Imam Musa Sadr says one thing. He says that I'd heard that a rumor had gone round that because this person is a Christian, Muslims don't shop from this place. He says, my humanity couldn't take that a man is suffering like this. I believe this was dhulm upon him, that Muslims were doing this to him. So therefore I've come to his shop because my humanity and the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada dictates that whenever a person is oppressed, I go and I help them. Me as a Muslim leader has come to a Christian shop so that when people see me eating there, then people are then inspired to break this rumor and to come to this shop. This is why I've come here. That is a leader. See, this is a leader. Our Muslim communities within the Western world requires leaders like that, innovative leaders. Today, if you look at the Shia within Lebanon, you find that they were in a position of strength. Why are they in a position of strength? They've given shuhada, right? It says in a tradition that when the drop of a shaheed falls onto the ground, revolutions come from that. Let me ask you a question. Why is it today that in Pakistan, 10,000 Shias have been killed and there's no revolution? Why is it slowly now that there is change coming? Go back a couple of months ago. Do you remember what happened within Kuwait? 86 people were killed. What happened? Haven't 86 people died within Pakistan before? Hundreds have died. Why is it that the entire Pakistan came to paralysis? I remember coming off the plane, coming into London. It was freezing cold. I was wearing a shirt. At that moment, I got the news. Go outside the embassy. There's a sit-in outside. And as I went outside, Shias were gathered there in hundreds sitting out there outside the embassy within London. And I found that even the embassy people were helping. They said, you can use our facilities. We're with you. They were saying, we're with you. Why was this? Because those mothers who had lost those sons took the message of Sayyidah Zainab with sincerity. They sat down in -2. The bodies froze there, but they said, we will not bury our children until justice doesn't prevail. At that moment, the entire country came down into paralysis. From Karachi all the way down to the tips of Islamabad, the entire country came to a standstill. Why was that? Because of this tradition. Why is it that in Pakistan you don't find revolutions against oppression, but within Lebanon there was revolutions against oppression? For one reason. Go back to the hadith and see. It says in the hadith that when Amr bil Ma'ruf stops from the mimbar, Allah then sends his adhab onto that nation. Within Pakistan, traditionally you found that the mimbar was given up to people who were worldly. It is now you find in that country that ulama have come back and taken that mimbar again. In Lebanon, what you found was when the ulama, Alim al-Rabbani came. Who is Alim al-Rabbani? In the tradition it says, Alim al-Rabbani, an Alim who is a Rabbani, or a godly Alim is that person who revives the hearts of the people. In the tradition it says, if once every 40 days you do not go to a godly alim, not a materialistic alim, not an alim who cares more about his D&Gs and Calvin Kleins and brand new cars, because Amir al-Mu'mineen speaks against that. If you go into the riwayat, you see Imam is saying, he's saying, Akhir al-Zaman, that alim who will be misguided will be the one who will be drenched within worldly, materialistic affairs. That when he comes onto the mimbar, he's not partaking knowledge, he's putting materialism into the people, and that's the decline of the people. But when the godly alim comes, Alim al-Rabbani, the one who is godly, in the tradition it says, if once every 40 days you do not go to an Alim al-Rabbani, your heart dies. That's why the hadith says, go to the Alim al-Rabbani so he revives your heart. Within Lebanon, when the likes of Musa Sadr, Alim al-Rabbani stood there, gave a khutbah, 10,000, 50,000 people's hearts were revived. That's what makes the difference. Have I seen it within my own life? I remember Ayatollah Bahjat. With my own eyes, I've seen this. Shall I give you a tradition from his life? Let me give you, so you can understand that. When a person like me, a sinful person like me says, lying is bad, right? Maybe 5 or 6 people may listen to me. The rest of the 10,000 people will say, well, you know, lying is bad. We know it's bad. But when an alim Rabbani says that lying is bad, and you think it's just one word, 10,000 people are affected. A lot of times you hear things, right? For example, ghibat is bad, and ghibat is bad, but you don't stop from ghibat. Or not you, but just generally we're saying, people don't stop from ghibat. Why? It doesn't have an impact. But when the alim Rabbani says ghibat is bad, it has an effect. I'll give you an example. There was a young lad, we say lad in English, a young guy, child, and he was, we have an Oxford Street in London, right? And this Oxford Street generally is where guys go and, the real world is this, they go and pick up girls, basically. In the same way in Qom, you have a place called Safaya, right? And you find that they don't pick up girls, but you get young guys there, they're showing off their fashion, tight jeans, nicely done eyebrows, hair gelled back, and you think to yourself, wow, am I in Qom? And about 6, 7 o'clock, they're walking these streets, and obviously you get these signs whereby they give each other their numbers, and khurafat is everywhere, right? Even Qom isn't secure from that. But it's in Qom though, 99% inshallah are religious, you get that 1 or 2 people, right? You get that everywhere. So in this way, this guy says, he turns around and he goes, look, I was one of those guys. Every Thursday night would come and I'd be out there and, I'm looking to get married anyway. And if I get 4 wives, it's more the better. And I'm walking around the streets. And he says that one day though, he says, but the iman is there, right? So within the Shia nation, you'll find that even though when they go off the track, sometimes, or all the time in fact, the love of the Ahlul Bayt brings them back on. And when the other nations go off the track, they go off the track. But when you look at us, when you look at our people, you find this is why the Prophet of God says, instill 3 types of love into the heart of your children. Even if they go off, they'll come back on again. It's like what Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam says. Imam says, he says that your children are like flock, right? They come back to the nest eventually. But instill 3 things. Love of the Prophet, love of the Quran, and love of the Ahlul Bayt. When you've instilled this love into their heart, believe me, anytime it can shake, anytime they can come back. This guy says, I was one of these guys who used tight jeans, chill out, I was doing all of that stuff. But he says, I had that love for Hazrat Ma'sum in my heart. He says that one day I went to Fajr time, and as I went into the shrine, I saw Ayatollah Bahjat sitting there. He says, I went to kiss his hand. He says, I went to kiss his hand, he pulls his hand away, and he looks at me, and I knew he was piercing my soul. He says, when he looked at me, I shook. He says, after that, I didn't realize, but everybody else realized. Fajr, awwal waqt. Dhuhr, awwal waqt. Salatul layl. He says, all of a sudden, in 40 days, my entire life changed. I didn't realize. When people asked, they said, man, you become a mullah. You were a hero before. What's happened? He said, I didn't realize that. He said, that look was so powerful that it changed my soul. See, one person. Now I understand that tradition that the 6th Imam said. This tradition is one of the strongest traditions we have from the 6th Imam. He says, my uncle Abbas, a person comes to the Imam and he says, final tradition. A person comes, and inshallah we'll continue the rest tomorrow. He says, final tradition, he says this. He says, my uncle Abbas. And he's talking about Abbas. When a person comes and he asks him, he says to Imam, Ja'far Sadiq in fact, he says, tell us, who's greater? Kumail, Amir al-Mu'mineen's companion, or Abbas, your uncle? They said, Imam in Jalal stands up and he says, my uncle Abbas is such, if he was to look at a person, he would make them into a kumail. I understood this tradition that day when Ayatollah Bahjat looked at this child and he made him pious. You see, that is Abul Fadl al-Abbas. He says, if he looked at somebody, you could make him into a kumail. And this is why in the tradition it says, my uncle Abbas has nafid al-basira. His piercing vision, that when he looks at you, he can change you in that way. You see, that's why, going back to that, what I was saying, alim Rabbani. When situation is becoming worse and worse, make sure that your community revives itself under the ban of the ulama. But that's your responsibility to find where you find alim Rabbani. Go back to the tradition, go back to the cultures, go back to the sunnah that was given to you by the Prophet of God. When the Imam is going into Ghaybat al-Kubra, and today, I know a lot of people will turn around and say that there's so much kind of rumors around ulama and this and that and the other. And we've heard that 7,000 ulama will be killed when the 12th Imam comes. But look, let me ask you a question. How many ulama are there in Qum? 50,000, right? In total who are studying. How many ulama are 100,000, right? Go to Najaf, go to Mashhad. If you take all of the ulama of the world, they're more than 500,000. 7,000 is just a drop in the ocean. Just because 1 or 2 bad apples have ruined the entire, it doesn't mean that all of the ulama are bad. Otherwise the Imam wouldn't have said, or the Prophet wouldn't have said, the ulama of my nation are like the prophets of the Bani Israel, the warith of the Anbiya. It's not like that. Go back to the tradition again. Go back again and see. We need to revive us. There was a lot that I wanted to say, and 15 minutes goes very fast. But the fact is, we need a strategic plan. In the same way that Sayyid al-Shuhada was teaching us a strategic plan. We'll look at this tomorrow then. A strategic plan on how we can survive within the Western world and revive ourselves to remove this misconception. Because people are good people, but the enemy will overcome us even within the Western world. What is the enemy? Is the enemy the non-Muslim? No. Islam doesn't say the enemy is the non-Muslim. Islam says, Amir al-Mu'mineen and Nahj al-Balagha is saying, the enemy is ignorance and the enemy is found within your own selves. Remove ignorance from a society, you remove the enemy from the society. What is our responsibility then? To do tabligh of the message of Sayyid al-Shuhada. How we do this, inshallah we'll look at it tomorrow. Hence there's a movement. We need to revive ourselves. You see, in the 20th century we've seen revival. Look at the ulama and the way that they preserved this nation. Go back to that tradition again. Do not be divided. Come back under that banner of marja'iyat, in the occultation of the Imam, and some people may not like this, but the only flag that we have is the flag of marja'iyat. Come under again, because otherwise you know why the Shia nation has survived? Centralization. Any nation that has centralization has survived today. Why the Ismaili so strong? Centralization. Bohra so strong? Centralization. Why are we so strong? We are stronger than the Sunni nation. Why is it that we don't have fundamentalism within us? Centralization. When we don't have centralization, mullahs will start rising in Afghanistan and you'll see fundamentalism spreading. Sunni world is divided today. There is fundamentalism within the Sunni world because they don't have that one centralization. Al-Azhar's power has been broken, so therefore mullahs will pop up all over the place giving fatwa. The reason why our nation is strong and there is no fundamentalism within our nation is because of the fact that we have centralization. You've heard the negative things about your nation. Let me tell you the positive things. We are the greatest religious nation on earth. Believe me. No other nation can bring so many people together. Other communities, societies are secular. But we are a religious nation who are gathered here. Who could have thought that on a Wednesday you have over 1,000 people commemorating Sayyid? It's because your religion is the strongest religion and the most central religion in the world today. At least look at the positive aspects of your religion. We look at hundreds of negative aspects, but what about the hundreds of positive aspects? We are one nation united today. We are united under Sayyid al-Shuhada. Go to Karbala and see. 20 million people gathering there is not a joke. And if you want to understand how peaceful we are, 20 million people. Go to Arbain. Last year, they say unofficially, Wikipedia says 25 million people. You go to Mecca, right? 4 million people are difficult to take care of. 25 million people? What is 25 million people? You don't find people fighting, screaming, shouting. Organized, they come into the shrine, they give their salam and they go again. Everyone is fed, no one is hungry, no one is thirsty. If you're ill, people treat you. If you're walking from Najaf to Karbala and your back is hurting, 100 people will come and say, we'll massage your backs because you are the zawar of Sayyid al-Shuhada. That is peace. If you want to see peace, that is peace. If you go today and you even go to Wembley Stadium, when you get an influx of people, you find fighting that breaks out. You find even within London when there is a procession, if it exceeds 10,000 people, you have so much police there because you know a fight will break out. Where are the police? There can't be even an army. 25 million people are coming and going. That is the miracle of Sayyid al-Shuhada in absolute bliss and peace. If you want to see a nation, therefore, who is in balance, if you want to see a nation, therefore, who is against extremism completely and who is moderate, look at the religion of the followers of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Year in, year out, we do that, and year in, year out, you see this. That's your nation, right? Be proud of your nation. Be proud of the fact that you are Husseini today. Be proud of those people who say, Labbaika ya Hussein. What is Labbaika ya Hussein? What is the meaning of Labbaika ya Hussein? The meaning of Labbaika ya Hussein is what? That I help people who are oppressed. The meaning of Labbaika ya Hussein is what? That I stand up and make that difference in my society. The meaning of Labbaika ya Hussein is what? Is that I help my society progress towards Imam Mahdi. The meaning of Labbaika Ya Hussein is what? That I gather here on these nights and I give my condolences to Zahra. That's the meaning of Labbaika Ya Hussein. If each one of us are gathered here today, it is because you have been invited. Do not ever look at your status as anything smaller than it is. Today you have been invited. And today you will gift your tears in the way of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Each one of you has bought something here, right? In the next 5 to 10 minutes, it is your time to reconnect again. Last night I said, make sure that you're in Bain al-Haramain, right? But today my heart goes out. Imagine yourselves in one location. Forget everyone and zone out. You have 7 to 10 days now to connect. Slowly these nights are going. You may not get another time to connect to Sayyid al-Shuhada. Yesterday we were in Bain al-Haramain. Imagine today that you are sitting within Medina next to that broken grave. You see, already tears are in your eyes. Already I can hear your voices. You know what that grave represents. I don't need to say anything. When I say broken grave, each one of you know what that broken grave is. You are not sitting in Bathurst today. You are now alone sitting next to that broken grave and you are going to give your condolences to Zahra alayhi salam. They say your tears in 6 or 7 maqamat help you. These tears will come and help you. One of those places is when you are in problems. How many people have said to me, Iltimas ad-dua, nasalakum ad-dua? People have been phoning me up and saying, my children are in problems. I'm having health problems. I'm having family problems. I tell you tonight that if you shed those tears in sincerity and you raise your hands and you ask Zahra to help you, those broken hearts that you have will be mended. So raise your hands. Somebody comes to the 6th Imam alayhi salam and he says to the 6th Imam, he says, Mala, we've heard of a tradition from your aunt and we hear a tradition from you. Your aunt says that Sayyid al-Shuhada was killed on a Friday. You say Sayyid al-Shuhada was killed on a Monday. Is these contradictory? Are these contradictory traditions? Imam says, no, these traditions are both correct. He says, how can both of them be correct? He says, one of the day is the actual day of the death of Sayyid al-Shuhada. The other day is when the Prophet's eyes closed and calamity fell on the house of the Ahlul Bayt. When did Karbala start then? Did Karbala start in Karbala? No, Karbala started when the Prophet's eyes closed. Look at the tradition and see. You know who the most mabloom person is? Amir al-Mu'mineen. If Sayyid al-Shuhada went and gave his life, Sayyid al-Shuhada had Abbas there. Sayyid al-Shuhada had Zainab there. Sayyid al-Shuhada had Kulthum there. But when you look towards Amir al-Mu'mineen, you see loneliness there because he had no one there. I remember after doing the ziyarah for the first time in Najaf, when I went back to Qum, Abahjad asked me, he said, what did you feel? And I explained all of these things. I said, what did you feel? You know what he replied? He said that when I go to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I feel loneliness there in Amir al-Mu'mineen's shrine. It's as if he's alone, as if there's no one there. What is the greatest tragedy of the Imam then? Imagine this, 25 years later, a person comes to the Imam, his beard is white. Someone says, Ya Ali, why don't you color your beard? You know what the Imam replies? He says, my heart is still broken at the death of Zahra. This is what the Imam says. Imagine that Imam. You know, when you have a problem in your life, you say Ya Ali, right? Whenever you stand up, you say Ya Ali. When you sit down, you say Ya Ali. When something befalls you, you say Ya Ali. Do you know what Imam then says? Imagine that Imam whose heart is broken. He would say, in the moment of night time, he would say Ya Zahra. He would miss his wife. You know, they say Amir al-Mu'mineen. You say a father can't cry in front of his children. That father is alone. Imam Hussein had Abbas. Amir al-Mu'mineen has no one. You see, a father can't cry. If I was to ask you to cry in front of your children, you don't cry, right? When a problem befalls you, what do? You stand up, you go into a room, you'll cry alone there. In the same way, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he would go at night time when nobody was looking, he would go into the well, put his head in the well, he would cry there. His heart was filled and his heart was broken. You know what it says in the tradition? It says one day Imam was walking through Kufa and there were people sitting there and they were talking. And you know what they were talking? They were saying, what is the most painful moment in the life of a man? Amir al-Mu'mineen stops there and he starts listening to this. One person stands up and he says, when a man is poor, he has no money, he cannot provide for his wife and his children. He says that is the most painful moment for a man. Then when someone else comes and provides for his children, he can't provide for his children. Another man stands up. He says the most painful moment for a man is when a man is ill and he can't stand up and he can't be there for his children. At that moment, they look towards Amir al-Mu'mineen. They say, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, tell us what is the most painful moment for a man. You know what Amir al-Mu'mineen says? He says, you've shattered my heart. They said, why? He says, the most painful moment for a man is that when a man is like me, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and when a person comes and they break into my house, and in front of me they begin to beat my wife, and they drag me onto the streets and they show me that they're beating my wife, and I can't do anything because I promised the Prophet of God that I will not do anything. You know what happens in that tradition? Imam Hassan alayhi salam says, Imam Hassan, 6-year-old, he says, I was watching them when they brought firewood and they brought fire to the house of my mother, and they were breaking that door down. My mother's hand comes out to stop the door from collapsing. They said they took a whip and they whipped the hand of my mother and they whipped her hand. And in this way they said, I was watching and I was screaming and I was shouting and I was saying, is there anyone to help my mother? There was one tradition, and it breaks my heart. A 6-year-old child. Imagine a child looking at his mother getting beaten up. In the tradition it says, Zahra was grabbed by the shoulder and she was pulled back in such a way that the second one took his hand and he slapped her on the face. And when the face had hit the face, they said the eye bruised, she falls on the ground. In the tradition it says Imam Hassan is running. There is no one. He's saying, is there anyone to help my mother? One person gets up with a sword. He hits the 6-year-old child on the head. Imam Hassan falls to the ground. You know what Zahra says? At that moment she doesn't call for Amir al-Mu'mineen. Zahra doesn't call for Imam Hassan. In the tradition it says in Bahar al-Anwar, Zahra stands up. She says, Mehdi, where are you to avenge me, Mehdi? Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. For the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, may Allah accept our worship today. For all of those people of hajat, all of those people who have come with hajat, for the sake of that moment, one more riwayat. For the sake of that moment, when 2 young children come into Masjid al-Nabawi, Amir al-Mu'mineen looks at them in the riwayat that says Imam stands up and collapses on his face, the Lion of God. And as he gets up, Hassan holds one arm, Hussein holds one arm. They say Imam holds on to the sides. Some message came to him. He doesn't know what this message, we don't know what this message is. A message came. Imam is holding onto the side of the wall and he collapses again. Somehow he comes into the house. They say the Imam goes running in. He goes into the room of Zahra. He sees the lifeless body of Zahra is lying there. Imam goes, he raises her head, he puts it on her lap and he begins to cry. Tears begin to fall on the face of Zahra, on her lifeless body. In the riwayat it says her hand raises, she begins to rub the tears on her face. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, why are you rubbing my tears on your face for? You know what she replies? She says, I've heard from my father that when a madloom man cries and the tears of a madloom man come out, the dua become mustajab. She says, Ali, I don't know anyone more madloom than you. After having her rib shattered, her eye bruised, her hair white, her back lashed, her face punched, after all of these things, she says, Ali, I don't know of a person more madloom than you. For the sake of that moment, may Allah accept all of our hajat today. May Allah hasten the dhuhur of the Imam and make us all part of his ansar. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi at-tahirin, Matam Hussein.